Go back to our story that we're trying to focus on there, which is with regards to South Africa's fourth quarter unemployment statistics. Clotilde Angelucci from the mobilization, who's rather a mobilization strategist at Youth Capital, joins us now as well. Then, Clotilde, hopefully this time you can indeed hear me. Just wondering what your thoughts were with regards to the figures having come out. I mean, does it inspire confidence that perhaps there is some change in the economic structure of our country?
Yeah, thanks, Arabile. Well, as a campaign advocating for policy change to solve youth unemployment, we're looking at these numbers and we can confidently say that nothing has changed and nothing is changing. Because if you look at the unemployment rates for young people, so young people keep on being the most vulnerable people in the economy. And if you look at the last 10 years, the unemployment rate for the group age between 15 and 34 has increased. So nothing has changed.
Yeah, and if nothing has changed then, I mean, what does this say long-term about this figure? Because that youth unemployment figure, if we were to zone in on that, that is still perilously high, above 40%. And it doesn't feel as though we've done enough to kind of put forward, while we have had ideas, whether it was the YES program of yesteryear that we even looked at, still nothing's changed. How do we get it right?
Yeah, I think, we engage with young people on the daily, and we really need to start understanding unemployment as a structural issue. So it's driven by structural, systemic challenges that young people haven't built, they haven't created. They were born in a system with these challenges, but they can't solve them themselves. So the issue is that the promises or the commitments are marginal, are light. But the biggest issue here, and I think I can say this confidently because tomorrow is budget day, is that they're not adequately funded. So they funded not adequately and not in the medium to long term. So if you look, for example, at 2024 national budget, the presidential employment stimulus, which is a public employment program that was created as a response to COVID, for the majority of beneficiaries being young people, the funding completely plummeted from like 12.6 million, I think, to 3.6. And the Basic Education Employment Initiative that deployed teacher assistants in schools across the country was pretty much cancelled. So I think if you also bring it back to the issues that young people are facing now with NSFAS, we are based here in Cape Town, and students at UCT as well as CPUT are fighting for accommodation and for the cancellation of the student debt. It means that the funding to the challenges that young people face is not adequate, and we have to change this. We can't carry on looking at social spending as spending, but we must really look at investment. Otherwise, we can't achieve inclusive economic growth. We simply can't.
Is it really about the overall figure, though? Because education is the most, the highest ticket item in South Africa's budget. But it feels to me as though strategically we haven't placed our economic future in future careers, future involvement of the youth and what it is that is ultimately going to grow the country so that we can get them into jobs that are actually helpful. That's one. Two, perhaps the private sector should be getting involved to ultimately say, these are the jobs we're going to need as a private sector institution or as a public sector institution. And so perhaps we would like to help fund or help curate a course that is ultimately going to be helpful. What do those ideas bring forward to you?
So these are very interesting points. I think the education item is really important because how are we going to build human capital? How are we going to build the productivity that in turn is going to promote economic growth? That's the one question and the one way of looking at it. And if you look at the academic throughput of young people in South Africa, it's not positive at all. There's some research that came out of NMU, I think at the end of last year, that actually shows that the National Scheme Bursary Fund is actually pushing vulnerable students into multidimensional poverty. So it's actually not helping them, it's making the situation harder. But the point on the private sector is really important because how are we signaling to young people the skills that are really relevant in the market now or in the future? And how can we bring the private sector closer to the work experience programs that we implementing? We definitely think as Youth Capital that The private sector involvement should be stronger in an area like TVET, so technical vocational training, but also in the public employment programs. Like, how can we make sure that those work experience that are paid for a short time prepare the young people, not just for the work etiquette, but also the skills and the knowledge and the network that the private sector can promote. There needs to be some alignment, but at the moment there's mismatch. But there can't be alignment if the funding is not secure and not in the medium to long term.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when I was still in university then as well, Clotilde, and I went on to do some vacation work. And this was at reputable firms, actually, that were ultimately hiring. I'd get paid for the time that I spent there as well. But it was the learning experience I needed before actually going into learning and working itself. Are we doing that enough? Are those vocations sort of being filled sufficiently? Are entities feeling enough confidence in this country to be able to do that? So ultimately, you've taken on these youth that will almost be part of your system right through until they start working for you.
That's a very interesting point. But what we forget is that in South Africa, 3 in 10 young South Africans live in households where nobody is employed. So it's also a matter of connecting the young people with the right skills to the right employer. And that is what academically is called social connection, social capital, social network. So how can we make sure that the private sector knows where to find these young people? We hosted focus groups 2 years ago with small businesses that really were passionate about hiring young people, but they couldn't find the right talent. So the question is also finding how do we ensure that those learning opportunities are for the right skill at the right time and in the right place, where they're not too far away from where the young people live, because that's also an additional cost. And we find that these financial expenses become a hinder, and then young people leave these opportunities.
Yeah, and trying to get them away from technology while making sure that technology is what they get into. Are we in a paradigm shift here, in a warped sort of notion? Because we don't want them too glued to technology when they're younger. But then as they get older, they need to realize that technology is the way forward. How do we start that from a younger age to ensure everything from early childhood development right through to being a youth and then an adult ultimately brings about the kind of change we need, so that figures like this in this unemployment rate aren't seen as we're seeing them now?
Well, we really need to start looking at this at a golden thread. We must really focus on what hinders young people from learning to read and write. We've seen the PILS rates, right? 8 in 10 young South Africans can't read, in grade 4, can't read or write in any language, right? And then we've got numeracy skills, and then we've got the ability to get a matric. So this is a journey. So youth is not just a moment in time. Yeah. So we must really look at these experiences and how we're forming the skills for the world around us. So the thing is that the strategy that the government and National Treasury is implementing now to tackle unemployment does not respond to the times that we live in. So we really need to up our game.
Clotilde Angelucci, thank you so much for the time. Really appreciated. Acting project lead at Youth Capital, then joining us to help unpack that a little bit more and really getting into the weeds of how we can help the youth, how the youth can be a part of the entire conversation here, because they're the ones that ultimately need the help the most, then, with that youth unemployment rate really spiking and still staying above that 40% mark. Now,